Today on Fear and Greed, there's life yet in the local property sector with data centres, retail and office blocks finding investor favour. National Australia Bank's profit disappoints, triggering a sell-off among Australia's banks, and KFC is leaving Kentucky. Plus, good news on the wages front, and the Whyalla steelworks goes into administration. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Thursday, the 20th of February 2025. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, the main story this morning, 3 of the country's biggest property groups reported yesterday. The somewhat beleaguered sector is showing some signs of life in some areas, notably data centres and, believe it or not, shopping centres, actually, but it's struggling in others like residential. So a bit of a mixed bag.
Plenty of profit results out over the past few days. We thought we'd wrap them all up. The big one, of course, was Goodman, the big daddy of the property sector.
Oh, please. Never use the term big daddy on this podcast again.
Okay, what were we, the big kahuna?
Yeah.
Right up. The big kahuna of property, Goodman Group, logistics company, went through boom time around COVID, morphed into data centres. Now it's really well and truly doubled down on data centres. It's raising $4 billion, with a B, $4 billion to spend and develop sites in Los Angeles, Sydney, Melbourne, Madrid, Tokyo. In fact, almost half its work nowadays is data centres. This is a company we know about logistics, all those industrial properties in the suburbs where they used to, shift goods into and out of. Well, it's that company, Goodman, is really pushing into data centres. Reckons that Greg Goodman, the CEO, reckons that the $4 billion they're raising will be used to create about $10 billion worth of value and 500 megawatts of capacity. We used to talk about property in terms of acreage and square metres. Now we're talking about megawatts. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It is the biggest capital raise among a property company ever. Goodman's actual result was almost forgotten yesterday. The bottom line went from $220 million to $800 million. Seems enormous. That's for the 6 months to December. That's about revaluations, though. So when we talk about property, the future, it gets a bit technical. I was going to talk about future earnings stream. I won't do that. Basically, how they value property in the future, chops and changes depending on interest rates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the higher interest rates are, the worse it looks, because property companies have lots of debt, so they're paying higher interest rates. Lower interest rates, you get these big revaluations.
Let's talk about Vicinity, because this is an interesting one. That obviously owns big retail assets, Chadstone in Victoria, QVB in Sydney, and a bunch of others. And they boast that two-thirds of Australians live within 30 minutes of kind of one of these centres. How is retail land looking?
I think this is a fascinating result because they reckon there's going to be a shortage in shopping centres over the next decade.
Hang on. Didn't shopping centres die?
Yes, apparently. So rumours of their death, greatly exaggerated.
Yes.
As it turns out. Long way from that post-COVID idea. There's population growth. That's the bottom line. And as a result, they reckon retail sales demand will be up about 30% over the next 10 years. But the actual amount of space given to retail shops will only be, well, in fact, they say it'll drop by 5%. So that mismatch means that there'll be great demand for shopping centre space. I think that's really fascinating. Vicinity itself, it reported, did very well on the back of revaluations as well. Announced a big jump in its profit. Stockland also reported. Now, Stockland does retail, but it also, mostly that's in the suburbs and regions. It's also a big residential developer nowadays. It creates master planned communities, medium density housing. That part of the property sector ain't doing so well. Now, its bottom line did very well on the back of revaluations, but Chief Executive Taram Gupta said really more rate cuts are needed to spark that residential property sector. It was down about 4% yesterday. If you add in recent announcements from a bunch of the office block owners, Dexus, Mirvac, Lendlease, they've all talked about the return to work trend being real. And, where I park my car in the morning at the railway station, I can never find a park if I'm not there by 8 o'clock. So as a result, it's real. You get that. You're really finding, so data centres and logistics is doing well, retail is doing better, office is doing better, maybe not residential. There's sort of life out there in the property sector. Now, if you take all the REITs together, and they're a very diverse bunch, what you're finding is that they've had a bit of a renaissance, up 13% in the last 12 months, 5% this year. And just the outlook, finally, after probably 6 really poor years, is looking better.
That's a bit of a good news story, that one. The big shock yesterday in earnings season was National Australia Bank's quarterly report. The result itself was okay, solid even, but it didn't beat expectations, and NAB's share price at one point was down something like 8%.
You know, I mean, that's where it finished in the end. The profit disappointed. I mean, it was down 2%. But, you know, revenue was flat. Bad and doubtful debts and mortgage arrears were a touch higher than Commonwealth Bank and Westpac. But really, it wasn't too bad. But all these bank shares are priced to perfection. So NAB said we made $1.7 billion during the December quarter. People wanted a little bit more than that. It was almost like there was a reason to sell National Australia Bank shares yesterday. And they did, down 8%. All the other bank stocks got sold off as well. It's we've talked a lot about price to perfection and Commonwealth Bank, JB Hi-Fi, some of these companies doing really well. Anyone that misses when you're priced to perfection gets sold down hard, and that's exactly what happened to NAB yesterday.
Yeah, that's what we saw. Now, the South Australian Parliament, Sean, moving away from earnings now, has effectively forced the Whyalla steelworks, owned by Indian billionaire Sanjeev Gupta, into administration, putting thousands of jobs at risk. This is a big employer.
Premier Peter Malinauskas called in Quarter Mentha after passing legislation that basically gave the state rights to enter the steelworks, get access to the accounts, and to give the state government a first charge over debts owed by the steelworks. Sanjeev Gupta's LPMA, which is owned by his global group GFC Alliance, owes the government tens of millions of dollars in unpaid royalties, while South Australian Water is owed something about around $15 million. Now, that tens of millions have been media reports. It could be up to $300 million, though yesterday the Premier wasn't saying how much it was. The background to this, Mr. Gupta, he's in the steelworks lender, a crowd called Greensill, collapsed about 4 years ago, leaving the group in a big financial hole, and it has never worked its way out of it. About 3,000 people work in South Australia, or 3,000 people in South Australia work for the company one way or another. Mr. Gupta had previously said he's aiming to get the steelworks back to profitability by mid-year. The South Australian government didn't have patience for that. They've pretty much taken the decision out of his hands.
Big start to the show immediately after today's episode. Stick around. You've got a chat coming up with Patrick Coughlin from Creditor Watch.
Yes. So it's a fantastic talk to Patrick about the SME side of the business. So we've been talking a lot about big business over recent weeks because of the earnings season. We talked to him about where the sector is, what the interest rate cuts mean for the sector in terms of people, administrations, those sorts of things, where small business is up to. It's a fantastic look at that.
Yeah, it's coming up after the show. We've got plenty more still to come. We're talking about Clive Palmer is back, Sean. His politics, though, have had a bit of a facelift. So we'll talk about that. A shocker for mineral resources, KFC leaving Kentucky. A lot more to come. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the federal government has played down suggestions that an election could be called soon, with Treasurer Jim Chalmers saying that he doesn't think Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has made a decision on a poll date yet. Do you believe that?
Well, I think he's thinking about his wedding date. He came out yesterday and said, he and his fiancée, Jodie Hayden, are going to get married in the second half of this year after the election. Yeah. Pictures everywhere, hand in hand. I reckon he's thinking about that more than he's
everyone look over here. Yeah.
Nothing's going on, honestly. Jim Chalmers did get a bit serious. He said that he thinks the worst of inflation's over, but he wasn't going to comment too much on interest rates.
Meanwhile, Clive Palmer's back. We've got to talk about this. The billionaire says he will chair a new political party. It is called Trumpet.
It's hard to say, seriously.
Trumpet of Patriots. And he says Australia needs, quote, more Trump policies.
Is a collective noun for patriots a trumpet?
I think it is now. I think we'll use this now, henceforth, forever.
After the Australian Electoral Commission confirmed the United Australia Party, his former party, could not re-register as a party, Clive Palmer said he'd take the helm of a new political outfit. Let me quote. Clive Palmer yesterday. The party believes in the policies of Donald Trump, which is shown to be effective in bringing management back on track. Australia needs Trump policy. Australians want them. I don't know whether that's true or not. Trumpet of Patriots will run candidates in the upper and lower house. It will focus on, and I need to quote here, ending the gender agenda. Ending the gender agenda, with policies banning trans people in women's sport and gender-affirming healthcare for young people. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, in response, said Clive Palmer spending tens of millions of dollars on a new party is a distortion of democracy.
You know, one group that will be very happy about this will be the media companies.
Yes.
Because Clive Palmer has historically been a very, very big spender in election advertising. And even last week, we had the CEO of Seven West Media, Jeff Howard, was talking about it. And I think it was talking about the expectation that between now and over the next kind of 3 or 4 months, there is the expectation that there will be this influx of political spending, as there always is. But the quote was, "We've already seen a bit of Clive money." Already.
Really?
It's referred to as Clive money.
Is it yellow? Is it yellow? Remember?
Yes. Oh, the billboards. You could not drive anywhere in Australia without one of the big yellow billboards.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Wages growth, Sean, has weakened to its slowest pace since the middle of 2022, providing support for the Reserve Bank's decision to cut interest rates on Tuesday.
During the December quarter, wages grew by 0.65%, 3.2% for the year, which is actually slower than what the Reserve Bank forecast. If you include bonuses, stuff like that, it gets to that 3.4% level. Wages have decreased pretty quickly since their peak. Maybe the employment market isn't quite as red hot as the labour force figures suggest. Now, the interest rate decision on Tuesday mentioned that the Reserve Bank is still worried about wages growth pushing inflation. The figures yesterday suggest that's not a major concern. Today we'll find out what the January unemployment rate was when the Bureau of Statistics releases its data at about 11:30.
Mineral Resources had a shocker yesterday, Sean. Its share price tumbled 21% after it said it needs an additional $300 million to upgrade the road to its new Onslow iron ore project in Western Australia.
So, interesting story. Onslow is a great hope for Mineral Resources, but it's costing a stack of money. Now, the road in question, it's 147 kilometres. It's had 5 truck crashes since August. That sounds bad. Think of the trucks. They're triple trailer road trains carrying 330 tonnes of iron ore each. They literally every few minutes, they are flying up that road, and it's a real problem. It's just hard to get your head around the size of those trucks carrying iron ore to the port.
That is huge, the amount of material that they are shifting and the weight of those trucks. That is huge.
So MinRes, they made a loss of $800 million in the 6 months to the end of December. They cut the interim dividend. No one expected that big a loss. Share price down 21%. Falling commodity prices, so iron ore and lithium in this instance. Torrential weather, uncertainty over its leadership. Remember, Chris Ellison, the founder and MD, is facing a probe by the regulator into allegations of corporate misconduct. All sorts of problems for Mineral Resources investors.
In 10 seconds or less, where did local markets finish up yesterday?
Down 0.7% to 8,419 points, all about profits, really. James Hardie was good. Santos, less good. Corporate travel jumped 10% because it had a pretty good profit result. Lottery Corporation did the same, although the waste management company Cleanaway didn't do so well.
I love how you simplified things now to just good or less good, and that's the new
just
scale.
Watch the share market, yeah.
Let's turn to international news now, and Donald Trump has said there should be elections in Ukraine as part of a peace deal with Russia in his first public remarks after the US held high-level talks with Moscow about the war. This was between US and Russia.
Yeah.
One party was missing.
Yeah, so Russia and the US agreed to lay the groundworks for future cooperation on ending the war in Ukraine. Now, incredible turn of events, really, because Trump called Russian President Vladimir Putin last week, said, let's end the war. But he didn't consult Ukraine. He didn't consult the rest of Europe, who's on the doorstep and providing support to Ukraine. Yesterday, the US president actually took a swipe at Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying it's been a long time since an election in Ukraine. Now, there was supposed to be an election last year, but that was put on hold because of the war. Trump went on to say, and I quote, "You have leadership now," as in Ukraine, "you have leadership now that's allowed a war to go on that should have never even happened." Now, he didn't mention that Russia actually invaded Ukraine, and he didn't talk about Russia destroying cities and towns. He also said, Trump, that he was very disappointed that Ukraine was upset about not having a seat at the talks, chastising Kiev for not ending the war.
Yeah, some of those comments really came across as though he was blaming Ukraine for actually starting the war and suggesting that they should have made a deal earlier. So it's just, it's a very interesting process watching this diplomacy play out very, very publicly and probably finding out about it. We're probably finding out about it at the same time as Ukraine.
Yeah, and diplomacy is probably being a very generous word, that one.
Yes, indeed. And the president said he was likely to impose tariffs on cars, semiconductor chips and pharmaceutical imports of about 25%, with an announcement coming, a few weeks, as soon as April 2.
The new duties, if implemented, would pretty much widen the president's trade war. Trump's previously announced 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium. They're supposed to take effect next month. Now, these latest comments are his most detailed, specifying other sectors that could be hit with fresh protectionist barriers. Australia will be hit by that because we sell pharmaceutical drugs into the US.
Sean, hold the front page. In fact, we should have led with this story, almost. KFC, which stands, of course, for Kentucky Fried Chicken. It is moving its corporate headquarters in the US from Kentucky to Texas. Does it have to change the name? TFC.
TFC? From Louisville to Plano, I think it's going to, in Texas. Yeah.
Doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it?
No, it doesn't. So the parent company's Yum Brands said about 100 corporate employees and dozens more remote workers will be required to move. KFC headquarters is no longer in Kentucky. It's heading to Texas. I think that's very disappointing.
Yeah.
But did you know that Yum Brands, it owns in the US KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and then Habit Burger and Grill, which we don't know so much about here, but it's a massive chain over there. Isn't that quite amazing?
Do you reckon when they relocate and the 11 secret herbs and spices get moved as well, would that be like an armoured vehicle? Because they would have to, because that would be written down there and it would be saved in a safe somewhere.
So the two great mysteries of my youth was what went in to KFC, the 11 herbs and spices, and what were the ingredients in Coca-Cola. And growing up, they were the two things that no one ever knew. Apparently, they were in vaults in Atlanta in the case of Coca-Cola and Louisville in the case of KFC.
I was reading about a case, and you probably would have reported this because it was probably only 10 or 15 years ago, where I was actually trying to be gentle and kind here. No, with Pepsi and Coca-Cola, where someone from Coca-Cola approached Pepsi in a case of kind of corporate espionage and said, "Hey, I'll sell you the secret recipe."
Yes.
And Pepsi actually picked up the phone.
Yes.
And called Coke and said, "You've got someone trying to sell your stuff."
Which is pretty cool.
Them up on it. It's honourable. There is honour in business, Sean.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, got a bit off track there.
Anyway, Kentucky Fried Chicken is no longer, it's like Texas Fried Chicken.
Yeah, sounds
there we go.
Still kind of tasty. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. Patrick Coughlin is your guest from Creditor Watch. Great interview if you are in business, particularly small business. It is coming up Fear and Greed playlist, podcast platform, or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Thursday, the 20th of February, 2025. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.